Like I was just constantly put down and singled out. And I was the only, I don't know if it's just because it was a personality clash, but this person was very senior, but I was the only person who was different on the team. Like by different in that I came from a poor family in the western suburbs, different in that I looked different, different in that I had a different background. I don't know what it was, but for some reason, this very senior person did not like me. So there'd be team lunches, everyone would get invited to except me.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining in on today's webinar. I'm Ricky Isaac, and I will be the moderator for our talk tonight with Antoinette Lattouf. But before we start, just a quick introduction to the Professional Development Forum. PDF was established to help diverse young professionals to reach their full potential in the modern Australian workforce. We believe that everyone, not just the elite few, should have access to the knowledge, mindset, and network to develop themselves. We believe that by becoming the best version of ourselves, we'll lead a happier, more fulfilling life and inspire those around us to do the same. And we do this by running events that aim to inform, connect, and inspire. And by sharing that we learn with our community, I'd also like to acknowledge that these events and webinars, including this very one that you're attending, is made possible by a group of volunteers that are as passionate as they are diverse. Many of them are among the audience tonight. Now, just a few housekeeping rules. We encourage everyone to please turn on your webcam so we can better connect with each other. Feel free to also leave your LinkedIn details in the chat box so you can add each other after the session. If you have any question at any time throughout the session or would like to comment on anything that was said, then feel free to type them into the chat box. You're also invited to ask your questions in the Q&A session. Please also note that the session is being recorded, so it may be shared on social media. Tonight, I'm very excited to have Antoinette Lattouf as our speaker. Antoinette is the multi-award winning journalist and Walkley finalist and has worked on a range of news and current affairs programs at the ABC, SBS, Network 10, and Triple J. In 2019, she was named among AFR's 100 Women of Influence. She is also the director and co-founder of Media Diversity Australia, a nonprofit that seeks to increase cultural and linguistic diversity in the mainstream media. Antoinette is also a journalism lecturer. Antoinette is a cross-platform reporter with more than 15 years experience. Her career spans television, radio, and online news and current affairs. Antoinette is passionate about storytelling and has a strong sense of social justice. She's worn many hats in her careers, including reporter, researcher, presenter, producer, columnist, lecturer, and panelist. And that is why she's the perfect person to talk about the topic tonight, how to find career success when you do not fit into any boxes. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Antoinette. Hi, Antoinette.
Oh, hi, Ricky. Thanks for having me, everyone.
Nice to have you. Maybe okay. Start with how you got into journalism.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I guess for me, the very reason I became a journalist, I was the daughter of refugees. My parents escaped civil war in the Middle East in the 70s. And then coming here, I was really fascinated by their journey and fascinated by their resilience and what they'd endured. So then growing up as I guess an Arab Australian when September 11 happened, and then the Cronulla riots, and seeing the public debate and I guess a lot of the antagonism towards my community, and also witnessing the fact that there weren't any other people kind of at the table partaking in those debates. It was a community that was spoken about, a community that was maligned, a community that was criticized, and sometimes rightfully so in some instances. But the lack of debate, the lack of perspectives, the lack of a right of reply really bothered me. And I thought, well, the only way I can try and address this, I don't want to just be a kind of disenfranchised, angry young person. That's the easy way out, is to be part of the conversation. So I guess the reason it wasn't a clear career path for me was because I came from a really working class family, and my parents were pulled out of school in primary school. And none of my relatives had gone to university, and I had a lot of family. So I was the first female in my extended family to go to university. And when I told my father I wanted to become a journalist, he was mortified. And he was like, "What? No, that's not what kind of a job is that? And you're not going to get hired. And you already talk too much. And who's going to marry a woman who's too smart and talks too much?" So he had really kind of old-fashioned patriarchal views. And then he sat me down and for a while tried to tell me to become a hairdresser. Luckily I ignored him because I'm terrible with scissors. I can't cut a piece of paper in a straight line. So I would have made a terrible hairdresser. So then I decided to go to university, and I want to go to the best university that's on offer. And I go to my careers advisor at my very average public school, but that's the education I could get. And he said to me, "Oh, look, don't know if you should aim for that university, but why don't you go try for TAFE, the local TAFE? And maybe if you're lucky, then after 1 year, they could do like a bridging course to like a 4th tier university." That was the careers advice I was given. So at that point, I pulled out of that school and enrolled myself into another one by forging my dad's signature. And I changed schools. And then I decided that I was going to get the grades I needed to get, and I was going to go to the university I wanted to go to, and I did. Then the next barrier is, how do you enter an industry that is so Anglo-dominated? How do you enter an industry where you have no connections in the professional world? You know, like I didn't live next to anybody who had a white collar job. Like my neighbors, some of them were members of outlaw motorcycle gangs. And so I didn't have, my daddy wasn't golfing with anybody. And so interestingly, it was a piece I wrote about multiculturalism and always being asked, like, where are you really from? While I was at university, that was picked up by the Sydney Morning Herald, and then SBS invited me to be on the show, one of their shows, and then I got a job offer. So I had a very unconventional entry into an industry. And 15 years later, I noticed that the industry still was so lacking in representation, and we were continuing to have waves of really poor reporting and divisive reporting of cultural groups. So while it moved on from the Muslims and the Lebanese a little bit to go towards the Africans, and now more recently towards the Chinese or anyone who's of Asian appearance, I realized it was the same kind of cycle that was happening, and it was the same media makeup of people commenting, choosing these stories, framing these stories. And then I was like, okay, enough. Like I'm in the industry, I've had, you know, a decent career, but now I want to, from the inside, work to try and change it, because we're becoming more polarized. We're becoming, you know, less able to engage in conversations, less tolerant of people who disagree with us. And I just don't think that's very healthy for our democracy. So that's why Media Diversity Australia started.
Right. Could you tell us a little bit more about media diversity? Like, is there any ongoing projects right now?
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you particularly focus on?
Yeah, so it's the point at which it started was, you know, I was at a gym, and you know, when you're in the cardio section and you see all of the television screens one after another, and it was like breakfast television programs, and I looked at every single breakfast television program, and every single person on screen was Anglo, every single person. And then I looked around at the gym, just a suburban gym in Sydney, nowhere fancy. I looked around the gym and I thought, look at the people around me in this gym. You would think that, you would never believe that this sample of the population actually existed, because we don't see ourselves on our screen. People go, oh, well, why does that matter? It's just the best person who gets the job. Any journalist can approach a story with impartiality and professionalism. And to that I call bullshit. Because I say, if you have a bunch of people with a similar lived experience, a similar lens, similar contacts, how are they going to bring nuance to issues? How are they going to bring nuance when we talk about Black Lives Matter? How are they going to bring nuance when we talk about migration policies and refugees? How are they going to bring nuance even if we talk about pregnancy? Like, everybody, our experiences are shaped by who we are and where we're from and who our connections are. So it was that moment that I thought, it looks like an advertisement for Hitler Youth or Aryan Germany, and I can't believe this is modern day Australian television. It's time to do something about it. And so that we do various things. So we do mentoring programs, and we have scholarships, and we're all working journos doing this at the same time. But one of the things we did this year was, for the first time in Australia, actually collect data on what our journalists on screen, what their cultural makeup is, and compare that to the Australian population. We've never had that data or that baseline to go, okay, this is where it's the worst, or this is where we need to focus most of our attention. And then we'll we repeat it in a couple of years' time to say, okay, what's worked, what hasn't worked? Because as we know, with diversity and inclusion policies, there's a lot of different views about what works, and some of it will be trial and error. But right now, there's very little being done, and there's no way to measure it. So that research received quite a lot of attention nationally and also internationally. And we had a bunch of recommendations. One of them, and I guess this is where might be relevant to the people listening today. So as well as getting more diverse journalists in the newsroom, culturally diverse journalists, editorial decision makers, reporters, presenters, editors, and all contributing to what the news agenda is, we also think experts, or the people that are invited on panels, or the people who are asked their opinions on topics, need to be more diverse. So too often we've seen, a discussion about Asia, China-Australia relations, or what's going on in Hong Kong, or something about Taiwan, and it'll be like John Smith from Sydney University's Asia Centre for, Asian Studies. And, John Smith, or whoever he is, might be a top bloke and he might be smart, but I just have had enough of John Smith talking about everything and everywhere. Surely we have the talent and the brain power in our very multicultural country to have somebody who, hey, might be Asian talking about Asia-Australian relations. And so our solution to that is, in Victoria, we've developed a directory. It's I jokingly refer to it as the brown pages. Unlike the white pages, like you put in, you find somebody and you get somebody who's diverse. So it could be based on your cultural group. So it could be that you're doing a story on, let's say, Indigenous land rights. So you type in Indigenous, or it could be that you're just doing a story on the economy and you want a banker, or because we know plenty of small business, that you're doing a story about the budget and the impact on small business. And you have, as we know, lots of diverse and migrant and refugee people run small businesses. So it's not just about brown people talking about brown people issues, or yellow people talking about yellow people issues, or green people, whatever it is. It's about normalizing and changing the face of what it means to be an expert, so that poor old John Smith can go sit on the couch and have a break. And somebody else can get a seat at the table and bring their different perspective. The importance of that as well is, too often if there's only one or two voices, they're the kind of like the go-to people who, and they don't necessarily represent communities or represent perspectives. But there's a bit of a, Jeffrey and I have spoken about this before, there's a little bit of a perception that, if you're from a culturally diverse background, you're really pro-migration, you're really progressive, you might be, and my mum is like, card carrying refugee against refugees, like she's, it's hilarious. I mean, I find it hilarious, and we have some very heated debates, but just because she has that background doesn't mean she's going to be a certain type of voter. And if you only have one or two people that are constantly called to the table, I think they can often present a really unrepresentative view. And it's like, oh, well, that's what Asians think, and that's what blah, blah, blah think, because we asked one person and we keep asking him all the time. And what I've seen, particularly in the Trump election, like my family and my community are really quite conservative. And people would be dumbfounded a lot, would be dumbfounded to know that they are Trump supporters. Or, for example, my sister-in-law is Mexican, and her family still live in the United States, and her mother is an illegal Mexican immigrant who votes for Trump. We don't get that kind of nuance. We don't get that. Right. We don't have these conversations. Like, why? What is it about it? Okay, so you might disagree with immigration, but what is it? Is it about job security and what is it? Like, just not making really simplistic assertions about people's views, and particularly when we're so quick to judge. And I think not having those different layers of perspectives is really problematic, and it just continues to fit. If we don't have it, people continue to live within these echo bubbles, which just reaffirm their views. Jeffrey and I, we don't always agree on Facebook, but I really enjoy reading his posts because it makes me think. And I've had a couple of biffos with a few of my cousins in the last couple of days over the election, but it's important that we engage with people who are different to us. And because our media doesn't have enough of that diversity of thought, as well as diversity of appearance, we're hoping that this can, having more diversity can address it. So this directory is a really practical way. So if anybody is Victorian based, because at the moment we've got funding for Victoria, I don't know where everybody is. If anyone's Victorian based, and you can be an accountant, a counsellor, a horticulturalist, you know, like you don't have to be representing your cultural community, but if you believe you have expertise in your relative field and are keen to be involved, yeah, perhaps let Jeffrey know and he can put you in touch.
Right. So what of the common defense when it comes to the lack of diversity on Australian media?
I've heard them all.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, some from good-hearted people, and they will say it's because there are not so many diverse people to choose to begin with, like in particular topics and stuff. And so I was just curious, in the course of your work in media diversity, how is the reality? Because I assume that you have met with an incredible amount of talented, diverse people. Yeah. So how was it?
It's interesting because it's a combination of excuses that don't stack up when you test them, and others that have some merit. So some of them are, well, they just not applying for the jobs. You know, we've got this pile of CVs and we don't have a diverse name as far as the eye can see. The issue with the media is very often they are not advertised jobs. It's an industry of informal pathways. You get in because of an internship, you get in because you know somebody who knows somebody, or somebody puts a good word in for you. So that formal HR recruitment process, relying on that alone is problematic because it's so limited.
Right.
In some senses, because people don't see themselves as reflected at networks or outlets, they won't even apply for a job. So there's a bit of self-selection going on. Yep. And you know, I applied. I mean, I've gone between commercial network and public broadcasting back and forth, which is a reasonably uncommon trajectory. I applied for a job at Channel 10. I got it straight away. I didn't know anybody there, but I just applied. You know, so my experience has been that I have been embraced, but I put myself forward. Having said that, I put myself forward knowing I would be the only person in the building that wasn't Anglo, other than, God love them, the Arab security guards at the front desk. So it was us, me and them. And you know, and so I put myself knowing, but for other people, they don't feel comfortable in that environment, or they just think I'll never have, you know, I wouldn't have a chance. And some people don't have an alpha. You may have gathered by now that I'm pretty strong-willed. But to be a good journalist doesn't mean you've got to be kind of chest beating and alpha and type A personality. And I just think that other, you know, environments need to try and proactively engage people and be more inclusive so that they feel comfortable working in those environments and they'll thrive. The other thing, what other excuses do we hear? Look, sometimes there's, like I had, family discouraging careers. They're not necessarily the most stable of careers. You know, everyone wants you to be a dentist or an engineer or a lawyer or one of those jobs that they can boast to their, you know, your auntie on the phone to when you graduate. And so sometimes there's a bit of lack of family support, but I would argue that the outlets need to do a better job of making the pathway, thinking laterally about the pathway, but then also being able to see people succeed. We don't have enough prominent, you could probably count them on one hand, given the fact that, I know somebody made the joke that, you know, if you were in hospital and you know, you had a really bad diagnosis of something, you should be scared if nobody around you was like Indian or Asian. None of the doctors were Indian or Asian. You should be worried that, you know, you're not getting good care. And so we see amazing talent in so many other industries. Why, like, it doesn't make sense that can't exist, that level of seniority. Some of our greatest thinkers in engineering, in a bunch of other fields, are from diverse backgrounds. So it doesn't stack up that we don't have that level of seniority in the media, other than that the industries aren't creating pathways, you know, and aren't supporting that type of talent. And so that's what they need to do a better job of.
So how did you overcome the family obstacle? Because as a Uyghur Chinese guy, I'm also very familiar with that patriarchy, you know, the whole system. And I think I went through the similar situation. I actually studied engineering and then ended up doing media. And so I know sometimes that when you're choosing these relatively unconventional career path, that you're going to face a lot of just pressure from family side. So how exactly did you cope with that?
Yeah, I had one person in my corner, and he was a family friend, and he he was a lawyer at a law firm in the city that shared the same building as Fairfax at the time. And he came and spoke to my dad. And he was like, oh, look, I know somebody that, you know, should let her come in and do some work experience. It's often fearing what you don't know, and your parents often want the best for you, particularly my parents who had limited English, limited education. You know, it was a bit scary for them. Yeah, so finding somebody who perhaps may not be in the same profession, but that can be a champion for you, that has the cultural understanding. Because, you know, like if I, for example, at the time when I was 18, was to tell an accomplished 30-something-year-old Anglo journo, can you please come to talk to my dad? He's telling me women shouldn't be too smart and then I should become a hairdresser. Could you imagine? Like, they'd be like, like, I don't want to meet your dad. I can't, like, who, what? You know, that, you know, Talal, who's since become a career mentor and actually on MDA's advisory board, was able to understand, you know, the cultural complexities and able to navigate it. So that, I guess that would be my advice. Find a champion, someone who can be your champion, who understands your culture and understands your family.
And also you talked about this diversity within minority groups. And sometimes we just experience this pressure to conform to a certain expectation of the society. Like, for example, if you're from a certain background and you work in media, then you should only be concentrating on these kind of, on certain types of stories. What's your view on that? And is that,
well,
how do you overcome that if you're really into something else?
Well, I think that some of the things that people have encountered when they've joined the industry, they don't necessarily only want to report on their cultural group, because that's just can be difficult as a young journalist. You're still navigating the industry, you're still honing your skills, you've got to deal with community pushback as well as expectations to get the scoop, and the scoop may well be exposing your community for wrongdoing. Like, for example, I did a story recently. There was a coronavirus outbreak at Our Lady of Lebanon, which is the largest Maronite Catholic Lebanese church in Australia. And I was reporting on it. In fact, I knew a couple of people who had coronavirus and subsequently somebody who died. And I ended up getting messages from going, oh, why are you saying this, and blah, blah, blah. And our community is being painted in a bad light, and this, that, and the other. And it's hard. It was even hard for me, with someone with my experience, to go, oh, like, I don't want to upset people. I don't want to upset people, let alone my own community. Like, and that struggle can be really difficult, especially if you're in the early stages of your career. It's hard, but sometimes if you can't, you have to say no to certain stories, set parameters, and just say. But if you say no, whether it's in journalism or whatever, I think it's always like, don't come to me with a problem, come to me with a solution. So you go, okay, well, I won't do this story, but I've got another one for you. Or I'm not comfortable with this project, but I've got another way of approaching it. Because I think if you're just a no person, that can be difficult to work with.
That just feels like the paradox, because many of these organizations, when they're trying to become more diverse, that's because they want to bring more diverse voice and diverse stories into their reporting. And
but they say that,
yes.
Whether that's an actuality is a different thing altogether.
Yes. And so just sometimes, because I remember when I was working in news industry back in China, and whenever there's something that is remotely related to Uyghur stories, they would just all look at me, and they just expect that I be the expert of this thing and only this thing.
Yeah, look, and that is hard, because, and I've had people from minority groups like Muslim people going, oh, well, you can, you know, you go and sit in that mosque and like be our little spy, or, you know, figure something, you know, and it's really hard. Again, did you ever try to come up with a different angle or a different story?
Always. But I just always get pushed into this certain box. I know it's sometimes it's completely understandable, because obviously I'd be the more yes, I have the connection, I have the insights, but also I think I speak to a lot of people probably in this crowd, that when you are being the diversity hire in the group, then there is a very certain box that you're expected to fit in.
Yeah, no, I agree. And there is a bit of one of the criticisms of diversity and inclusion strategies or being so open about it is the way people who end up getting those jobs feel when they're in the role, or the way they get treated by other people. So, for example, the ABC in recent years has done a big kind of diversity push, and they're trying to bring in more talented young people. The ABC's problem is that they can't keep them, and they end up going within a few years. But one of the cadets, she really struggled, feeling that she was just there because of the way. She's incredibly talented, by the way, and she's kicking serious career goals. But at this time, a few years ago, really worried that she was only there because of who she was and not what she brought to the table. So you begin to question yourself. Some people do anyway. Then there were comments from other people around her going, oh, well, you don't have to work that hard because you're the diversity hire, or, you know, you'll be fine. They're not going to get rid of you. They can't get rid of you, you know, and having things said to, like that. And then another thing that happened, she happens to be of the same background as me. We were working on the same program because cadets get moved all around, so they have experience in different departments. And the presenter of that program confused the two of us 3 times in 2 days. She kept calling me this other person, and I'm just like, really? Like that kind of, I mean, I thought it was, I laughed. I felt a bit sorry for her because she's like 12 years younger than me. So I'm like, sorry that we got confused as the same person. But it's also a bit demoralizing that you're a bit one and the same, and you're, you know, you must be the junior diversity hire. So that can be a bit problematic. But, you know, that's one person's experience. Other people have, you know, enjoyed the opportunity, grabbed onto it with both hands and really succeeded. But I see there's a whole bunch of questions in the chat. Am I meant to respond to them, or how do you?
We can come to the Q&A session later after the webinar.
Yeah, we'll go to the questions in the chat. Okay.
Yeah, you're just talking about your bad experience, and I think I have an even worse one to trump yours. Okay. Well, when I was working in the magazine, a fashion magazine, and I was there for a year, and I was hired directly by the editor-in-chief. So we have this quite close personal relationship. And then just one day we were having this meeting, and just all of a sudden, out of the blue, I don't think he was thinking, and he said, how's your Chinese? He asked me how my Chinese is. And me being this person who works in a Chinese media and has been working with them for a year, and I literally speak and write Chinese for a living. And so it was just so interesting that even someone who was so close to me sometimes just put me in this stereotypical box and expect that maybe I don't speak Chinese as well.
Well, I mean, those sorts of stories, and I'm sure it's really hard, and I'm sure everyone in this group has similar gripes. Part of the issue when there isn't diversity in the team is that you don't have your little gang, your little, oh gosh, I shouldn't say that, being a Middle Eastern gang.
That's going to come back to you.
You don't have your posse, you know, you don't have someone just to vent to and go, am I being oversensitive? Am I being, you know, like, has that happened to you too? How did you navigate it? It's about the isolation. And at the very least, what things like the Professional Development Forum and MDA can do is provide that space just to talk, to vent, to get ideas, to share experiences, to feel supported. Because it's really hard when you're the odd one out and you hear something like this to go, well, am I being overly sensitive? Is this, or just to talk about, I find even just to talk about race, or to talk about China, or to talk about, I find it sometimes really difficult. People go really quiet, or they're scared about what they get, you know, they just don't know how to talk to me about it. They're scared to have those conversations. And I think it'd become more natural and more dynamic when there are different thinkers in the room. And I mean, and there's been so many studies that have shown that diversity leads to more innovation, more like longer staff retention, more profitability, more different ways of approaching things. So like, forget the moral imperative. It makes business sense to have different thinkers at the table.
So you talked about the importance of sharing these experiences, and what are your suggestions to people that are exactly in the process of feeling that they're alone and there's just absolutely no one, no friend, no coworker, no family that can understand what they're going through? Is there any way that they can vent about it?
Yeah, look, I think there are more and more online communities that provide, so I think you've got to go looking for them. I know, for example, you know, there's things, I see that most people on here, I can't see everybody's faces, but many have an Asian background. There are more, I'm seeing more Asian leadership initiatives. So I think there are now more spaces and people who have come forward. I have a lot of people reach out to me from a range because they see the sort of work I'm doing. So if you see someone in your industry, even if it's not quite your industry, but you know that they've been, been vocal, I would reach out to them because you'd be surprised. I'm so responsive, even though I'm so time poor, because I know what it was like to be that person who was by themselves, and I know what it was like to try and navigate something completely uncharted territory, which can be a bit terrifying. And so I always make time, even if it's just a quick LinkedIn response or a coffee or something. So I would suggest looking for networks, organized groups, but not being afraid to ping someone on LinkedIn and say, hey, this is me, a little bit about me. Do you have 5 minutes? But yeah, that's what I would do.
But how exactly did you do when these things were happening to you? Before there's PDF, before there's media diversity, before there's this greater awareness of diversity and certain way that an organization should behave on this topic, when these things happened to you, how did you overcome it?
Look, it was difficult. About a year, not even less than a year ago, I came out publicly about that. I had very, very intense bullying at my first job, my first journalism job, SBS of all places. But I just copped it because in my head, I'm thinking, my dad already told me don't become a journalist. And here I am with my first job. And, you know, so badly that, you know, like I would go to the bathroom and vomit and then go back to my desk. And and then after I waited it out for 2 years. So I had enough experience to get my next job. And I kind of just copped it. And people say to me now, well, would you do things differently? I probably wouldn't, because I didn't have any allies. Who was going to give a crap about me? So I just gained the experience I needed, ensured that my work was good, and then I moved on. And the only reason I spoke about it 15 years later is because the management at SBS continues to be Anglo. And I remember I mentioned what happened to me to one manager who kind of didn't say anything, but everyone around me knew what was happening. And I think if it's a safe space, and if people are going to challenge power structures and challenge racism, somebody would have been in my corner, but there was nobody in my corner. So I at that point had to just cop it, endure it as much as I could until I found my next job. And I couldn't do things differently if I went back, unfortunately. But what I'm trying to do now, so subsequently since coming out, and there were two Indigenous journalists also spoke about their experience. The SBS has hired an independent lawyer. They've done this investigation and they've walked 2 people from the building. And then all these people, I didn't realize, a cameraman at SBS I saw at a press conference the other day said, did you see what you guys started, you and this other journalist? And I was like, what? It's like 76 people came forward with stories of racism and bullying at SBS. And I was like, oh, wow. So yeah, I copped it then, but I'm trying to do something now.
Do you see any improvement in the industry or in the larger Australian society when it comes to diversity?
I think we're having conversations. I don't think we're having necessarily the most mature conversations, but that's much broader than just media diversity. We're at a time where social media has a lot to answer for in how polarized we are and the sorts of information we're exposed to. There are larger factors, larger global factors at play as to why our discussions about difference and race, I don't know, I don't think they're in a very healthy place. But I'm hoping that can change, or at least I can't help but be a straight shooter. But I can't help but hope that the conversations and the panels of all white dudes talking about racism, that they can change and that can be challenged. And it's not, I don't want to just sit here and talk about racism because that's not my thing, but I'm saying until we have different thinkers at the table, and I mean by diversity of thought, not just diversity of appearance, we can't start to really tackle what's dividing us, because I think people are really feeling not represented and not heard. And when they don't feel represented or heard, they turn to conspiracy theories. They turn to fringe groups on the left. They turn to fringe groups on the right. And no matter where it is, fringe is not where you want to be. And I find more and more people are on the fringes because we're not listening, and we're not giving the right mix of people a perspective. So so I guess my very long-winded answer is having more diverse thinkers and diverse leaders in public life, not just, I'm not talking about just the media, in politics, in business leadership positions. And I think then we'll be able to start to tackle some of the problems that we're facing.
Right. All right. So shall we get into the Q&A session? I see we have a lot of questions.
Yeah, sure.
I'll just filter through the ones that are just pure compliments.
Someone said imposter syndrome. Yeah, sometimes we feel like imposter syndrome. Yeah. How did you deal with being treated that way? I went into the bathroom and vomited on my lunch breaks.
True story.
I didn't feel very great. But you know, it was what it was.
What happened that made you vomit?
Oh, just the bullying. So I was
after the bullying.
I was ostracized. I was always put down. I was just constant. Like I was just constantly put down and singled out. And I was the only, I don't know if it's just because it was a personality clash, but this person was very senior, but I was the only person who was different on the team. Like by different in that I came from a poor family in the western suburbs, different in that I looked different, different in that I had a different background. I don't know what it was, but for some reason, this very senior person did not like me. So there'd be team lunches, everyone would get invited to except me. They were just bullying, like classic bullying. But yeah, I didn't, what did I do? I didn't do much.
But how did you overcome it on the psychological side?
It took a really long time. It took me 15 years to talk about it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you kept vomiting this whole time?
No, thankfully not.
I find that's the worst, like the way that it just bruises you on the inside.
Yes.
Whenever that thing happens.
I'm so sorry.
Sorry, did your internet crash?
Yeah, well, after I installed NBN, now my internet just sometimes switches off. So it just crashed. I'm really sorry.
I've been through that. It's all right. I
think I was answering the question about what to say to somebody who's square peg, round hole. I don't know. I would just question, like, who said the hole was round? Like I would question what it is that they're trying to establish that you don't, what it is about the culture or your credentials that don't meet it. The only thing that I have witnessed in either leadership roles or sort of corporate roles, and I've encountered this doing some projects with Asian leadership groups, is that the view of leadership and the view of interaction or even approaches to conflict resolution and that differ. I'm back, but I'm not going to dare put on my video should it crash again, and I apologise sincerely for all these disturbances. I'm really sorry.
That's okay. I just read this interesting comment in the comment section. So it's from Kate.
Yes.
She says, I'm Anglo, married to an NZ Samoan with 2 children and a journal. Have made it a personal responsibility to include and elevate diverse voices. We should never be speaking for groups we do not personally represent. Especially for that last sentence, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, look, I think it's such an important observation. And I think the greatest thing we can have is allies, and
yes.
allies who see the merit of diversity, who want to hear from diverse thinkers. So thank you so much, Kate. And I think it's really important if ever you're presented with an opportunity, and this can sometimes happen to me too, not with the culture space, but sometimes people will ask for me, oh, can you come and speak at this panel, blah, blah, blah. And I'll have to have a look at the panel and go, but there are no Indigenous people. Or I was asked to speak at a disability fundraising, like a Special Olympics fundraising thing. And I was like, okay, cool. Who's the person with living with a disability? Oh, there are none. Oh, okay, I'll give up my spot. and include them. So sometimes we need to be advocates, and it's easy to go, oh, wow, I've been asked again and people want to know my opinion. And, but sometimes we have to stop and think, okay, who else is at the table? And what am I doing to contribute to a lack of representation? So it's not just you, Kate, that needs to do it. We all need to, and it could be you, Ricky, it could be Jeffrey. You guys might have a discussion, you might be asked to speak on a panel about, I don't know, Asian interaction on social media in the Trump era. If there are 4 Asian blokes on that panel, you have a responsibility to say, oh, where are the women? Or I know for a fact we all agree with one another. Why don't we get somebody with a different view? I know we all a little, politically or professionally similar. Why don't we get, I don't know, that's cool. Let's get, how about we get this person, because I know this person sees it very differently to me. So I think we all have a responsibility to play there.
Do you have any other questions?
I saw a few more in the chat, but the chat history has disappeared for me now.
Yeah.
Yes, I have a question. Sorry, it's me again. I really want to go to media to work. But then hearing your story, I just feel like, oh, maybe mainstream media is not good to work with. Is it that true?
You know what, it's so interesting because I was having a bit of a moment last week, and a colleague of mine said, you actually meant to inspire the next generation, not scare them off. It's a difficult time to be in the media, not only because of the diversity issues, but the business model the media is facing is in a bit of a crisis. So once upon a time when, we got out our news once a day from the paper in the morning or the one news bulletin in the evening, it was a lucrative industry and advertisers spent a lot of money. But because of Google and Facebook and our addiction to being online, the advertising has gone online. But those outlets aren't creating content. They are not news producers. They might be news disseminators and news aggregators. So there's a lack of investment in the business model of journalism, which I would say is one of the most difficult challenges facing people who are incredibly talented and have a lot of experience. They can't find jobs. Having said that, innovation and diverse thinkers is what we need to bring to the table to make it better, to fix this problem. So I wouldn't discourage you, but I think it's important to go in eyes wide open. I've probably discouraged you, haven't I?
Okay, thank you. No, thank you. But definitely, I would love to have a quick chat with you afterwards.
Yeah,
when
sure.
you're free.
And it's probably just time to rethink the idea of mainstream media, because after all, like today, we are creating this content and it's going to live online forever, and we're not mainstream media. But I think it's reaching more and more people, and it's of value. So
yeah, it is. And I think it's, the other challenging thing is that there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation because you can Google. I mean, if I went on Google right now and searched and read enough forums, I'd convince myself I was an amputee with cancer. You know what I mean? Like you can go and find whatever information you're looking for. And so I think that's a bit of a problem, that there's a bit of a credibility problem with the media.
Yes.
But there's also from a consumer and audience perspective, there's not enough literacy in terms of how do we discern fact from fiction. How do we, fake news spreads 6 times faster, disinformation spreads 6 times faster than a fact. So I think it's a problem at both the audience end, the journalists end, but also the outlets. So it's a really interesting turning point, and I'm part of the ride and hopefully part of the solution. But we haven't seen this kind of disruption to media that we've seen in the last 5 years. In the whole history of media, we haven't had this kind of disruption. Any other questions more broadly on leadership or inclusion or workplaces? Because I'm imagining a lot of you aren't in the media.
Thank you. My grandfather, Clive Hale, was an ABC reporter, a very famous ABC reporter a very long time ago. I'm hoping to become a journalist. I study arts as well, so I'm hoping to become. What would you have to say to someone who is white, who has been discriminated against by other white people for no apparent reason? I feel the same discrimination that you felt, but on a different level.
I mean, it's difficult for me to say. People can be horrible to each other. There's discrimination in many forms. I'm not sure how to answer this because I don't know. your specific circumstances, other than to say, I guess, a similar thing I've said to everybody else, that, you know, equip yourself or surround yourself with people, you know, find your posse. Find somebody who can be a support person and an ear, who's further in their career, who might understand, whether it be your, you know, socioeconomic, your family background, whatever it is that your situation that you think you're being targeted for, or, you know, and I just think invest in those relationships, because sometimes, and I've had this with a good friend of mine who's actually a mutual friend of Jeffrey's, and I'll raise something to him, and he's like, oh, you know what, I don't actually think they meant that. And I don't think you know, I don't think it, and, you know, sometimes it's good to have people you trust to be a sounding board. Again, people you trust who may not always agree with you, because you don't need people around you just reinforcing what you already think. It's important for us to be challenged more than ever. We need people to go, you know what, Antoinette, or you know what, Kim, I think perhaps it's over X, Y, and Z, or perhaps you've misread this, or perhaps you need to have a coffee with them. I'm a real fan of killing things with kindness, and I know there's a lot of that doesn't happen on social media, but there's been a couple of stoushes on that could have really escalated on Twitter, and I ended up inviting that person for a coffee, and both times they accepted, and both times I took it offline. And both times they accepted, and we have since got a really good working relationship. And they said, oh, I'm so sorry, I was caught up in the heat of the moment, and thank you for not returning fire. You know, sometimes that takes a lot of self-control, but, you know, so if you don't have your posse or that person that you can lean on with more experience who might challenge you, then I would suggest killing it with kindness. That's the way I do things. Doesn't always work, but at least I go to bed at night feeling like I'm not a shit human being.
Okay, can we have one last question? Does anyone have one last question?
Hello, sorry. I would just had a question to Antoinette about like leadership, because a lot of times these issues come from from leadership. I'm not even sure how to even ask this, because it's like you know, a lot of the culture just sort of trickles down.
Absolutely. And I guess if I understand your question, it's, you know, how do things get better if leadership isn't on board, or if there's a problem at the top? Yes. Which is why, for example, at the ABC for a few years, they're doing a little bit better now, even though they had all these entry-level and lovely, warm and fuzzy programs to support diverse talent. They weren't staying because the culture wasn't right, and the culture comes from the top. So I guess for me, when people say things changing enough, I say, well, it's a long game. It's going to take a while, because until the leadership ranks are either fully on board or you have diverse leaders among the ranks, and look at women, getting women on board, that's taken a really long time. And at the moment, like when we looked at all the network boards, for example, any woman that was on a board was a white woman, and there might be 2 out of a board of 8. So that progress has taken a really long time, and it still hasn't gone the full way of diversity because it's just a white woman, you know. And then I guess the same waves could be said for, you know, LGBT and disability, that until we have fully actual representation, the culture can't change. Having said that, you need allies, and you know, some of my greatest champions have been middle-aged white guys. My biggest supporters have been middle-aged white guys. So why it's very easy to deride and write them off. So again, find an ally, but also know that change will take time. And as good as your grassroots initiative is, as good as your little drinks are, and as good as the colourful memos are around the building, things aren't really going to change until the top changes. And that's just going to take some perseverance and having playing a longer game.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so that concludes tonight's webinar. Thank you, Antoinette, first and foremost, for taking out the time to be with us tonight and sharing your wonderful insights. If anyone in the audience would like to know more about Antoinette, just turn on the TV and she should be there. Thank you also to PDF team for making this entire webinar possible. Also, thank you all for joining us here tonight and engaging in the discussion. Tonight's been fun and informative, and this couldn't have happened without you guys. If you enjoyed tonight's webinar, please help us by filling out the poll so that we can better understand the sort of contents that you as the audience would like to see from us. As I tell you about our next event, Next Thursday, 15th of November, we will be joined by Andrew Tyndale. A link to the registration page will be provided in the chat box. You can, of course, find it on our LinkedIn Eventbrite page and website as well. We also have amazing podcasts and videos that you can watch, so please follow us on all the social media platforms. Again, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Have a good night.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey Wang, the founder of the Professional Development Forum.
PDF was established to help young diverse professionals find fulfillment in the modern Australian workplace.
By asking questions to the most successful, influential and inspirational people we knew.
We were inspired by their stories of tenacity and passion.
We learned about the creative approaches to overcome challenges.
We believe that everyone, not just the elite few, should have access to the knowledge, mindset and network to develop themselves.
By becoming the best version of ourselves, we lead a happier, more fulfilling life and inspire those around us to do the same.
Moving our events online has made us more accessible than ever. We share what we learned on our website, YouTube channel and podcast. So please share this video, subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. We look forward to seeing you at an upcoming event.